The Alliance of American Football. It's almost been half a decade since the AAF folded and left many football players without a job. Of course, some would get jobs in the NFL and some would sign with other football leagues. Players would make it big because of the AAF, like Atlanta legend kicker Younghoe Koo, who had earned a Pro Bowl with the Atlanta Falcons, and the Orlando Apollo, now Cleveland Brown, Dearness Johnson. But arguably the most discussed position in football is the quarterback. Today I'll be going over all of the quarterbacks that signed with the AAF and where they are now. I'll be splitting between the two conferences in the AAF, the East Conference and the West Conference. Today I will be covering the East Conference, which consists of the Orlando Apollos, Memphis Express, Birmingham Iron, and the Atlanta Legends. AAF quarterbacks. Where are they now? Birmingham Iron would be the next best after Orlando, and technically the second team to clinch a playoff berth, going 5-3. And the man that took the charge was Luis Perez. After playing no varsity football, Perez would commit to Southwestern in 2012, being the 9th quarterback on the roster. He would eventually be the starter after many of the QBs would be injured or transferred out. He would start in 2013, being backup, but would be the starter by the third week. In 2014, he would be the starter and lead the Jaguars to a conference title and a conference honors. With the motivation to go Division I, Perez would transfer to Texas A&M Commerce in 2015 and would be redshirted that year. Perez would start in 2016 and take the Lions to Division II playoffs and win their first Division II playoff game since 1991. In 2017, Perez would go 10-1 and win the national title game against West Florida. After a huge senior season, Perez would go undrafted in the 2018 NFL Draft. He would try out with the Los Angeles Rams and earn a contract. He would play out the preseason with the Rams and was signed to their practice squad. He would be released a couple weeks later. Perez would sign with the San Antonio Commanders, but get drafted by the Iron with the 5th pick in the first round of the quarterback draft. Being one of the few successful quarterbacks in the AAF after the league folded, Perez would sign to the Eagles in the 2019 offseason, but get cut the following 2019 draft. He would sign with the Lions for the 2019 preseason, but was cut 4 days later. Perez would be assigned to the Los Angeles Wildcats in the XFL, being one of the Tier 1 quarterbacks, but was traded to the New York Guardians for Charles Knopf after the Wildcats claimed Josh Johnson. Perez would start as a backup behind Matt McLeod until starting Week 4 against the Wildcats. He would lead the Guardians into 2 straight wins before the XFL ceased. After the XFL, Luis Perez would play for the Jousters in the Spring League. In 2022, Perez would sign with the New Jersey Generals of the USFL after the release of Ben Holmes. The Generals would have a 2-quarterback system between Perez and DeAndre Johnson. The Generals would go 9-1, claiming the North Division, but be short of the championship after Luis Perez would throw a game-sealing interception to the Philadelphia Stars. After the USFL, Luis Perez would sign back to the Los Angeles Rams shortly after they just won a Super Bowl. Luis Perez was the solid rock for the Iron, but backup Keith Price had his time to shine for Birmingham. After a spectacular senior season in high school being overshadowed by Matt Barkley, Price would commit to Washington in 2008. After being redshirted, Price would be the backup in 8 games, starting 2 games relieving injured Jake Locker. Keith would be the starter in 2011 and have a solid performance, once again being unnoticed. Keith Price would continue into his last 2 seasons with Washington and go undrafted in 2014. He would sign with the Seahawks shortly after, but was released a month later. On September 2014, Price would sign with the Rough Riders of the CFL, playing 4 games but not 1 snap. He would start only 1 game in 2015 before becoming a free agent in 2016. He would sign with the BC Lions, being active in 18 games but not play a single snap. He would be released in 2017. Price would sign with the San Diego Fleet in 2018, but was undrafted in the quarterback draft. He would sign with the Iron to make the roster behind Luis Perez. Price would come in twice for Perez, throwing only 1 touchdown and having the 67% passing completion rate. After the AAF, Keith would try out for the XFL, but was not drafted or signed. Currently, Keith Price is a football recruit for Boise State and promoted to a wide receiver graduate assistant in 2022, but is presumably retired from football. With 2 quarterbacks making the initial final roster, Marcus McDade would barge in mid-season. McDade would commit to Fresno State in 2011. After being redshirted, McDade would only play 2 games backing Derek Carr, running for 6 yards with 2 carries in 2012. Marcus would transfer to Sacramento State in 2013. He would only have 2 games, running once for 8 yards. After college, he would go to German Football League and play for the Frankfurt Universe in 2016, leading them 12-3 as they were the best team in Europe, throwing 33 touchdowns and running for 7. In 2017, he would have a trial with the Buffalo Bills, but not get a contract. He would play with the Spokane Shock in the Indoor Football League in 2018. He would sign with the Iron after week 3, playing 5 games, but not a single snap for Birmingham. After the AAF, McDade would try out for the XFL, but wasn't drafted. He would sign with the Wildcats, but was cut a couple weeks later. After, he would sign with the Houston Roughnecks, being the 3rd string behind PJ Walker and Connor Cook, and now record a single snap for the XFL. After the XFL, McDade would go back to Spokane Shock until September 2021. As the Iron ended with the league with 3 healthy quarterbacks, Blake Sims was the only quarterback that wasn't. Being a 4-star prospect coming out of high school, Sims would commit to Alabama in 2010. His first 3 years would play between quarterback and running back until 2014, where he would start his first game as a quarterback. He would start all 14 games that year and even break the single-season passing record once held by A.J. McCarron. Sims would take the Crimson Tide to the playoffs, where they would lose to Ohio State, in which they would win it all. After not starting quarterback until his solid senior season, Sims would go undrafted in 2015 and tried out as a running back for teams like the Packers and the Redskins, but wouldn't get a contract. Sims would sign with the CFL Toronto Argonauts in May, but would be cut a month later and sign with the Rough Riders. He would make the active roster, but was cut after 1 game. But when the Rough Riders traded one of their quarterbacks, Sims would sign back to the roster. He would go inactive until being cut in December. In July 2016, Sims would travel to Australia and sign with the National Gridiron League Wollongong Devils. After that stint, Sims was signed to the Atlanta Falcons practice squad in September 2016, but was cut a couple weeks later. Sims would sign with the Buccaneers in December and stay with them until being a final roster cut in 2017. Sims would sign with the Iron and retained by being drafted in the 2nd round. Unfortunately, Sims would injure his hamstring before the season began, putting him in injury reserve, which he would stay when the league folded. Since then, Blake Sims played in the Indoor Football League alongside Marcus McDade in the Spokane Shock and later the Frisco Fighters. Lately, he would make an appearance on Twitter, being seen with Mark Ingram II and Alvin Kamara during the National Championship in 2022. Even with all those quarterbacks, Iron had one more quarterback but retired before the preseason can start, and that man was Scott Tolzin. Tolzin played 4 seasons at Wisconsin in 2007 to 2010, with his senior year being the greatest season after being honored Johnny Unitas Golden Arm Award and 2nd team All-Big Ten. Tolzin would go undrafted in 2011 and sign with the Chargers to play the preseason until being the final roster cut. He would sign with the 49ers, being the 3rd string behind Alex Smith and Colin Kaepernick. Tolzin would play out 2012, being 3rd string once again until he was a final roster cut in August 2013. After being cut, Tolzin would sign to the Packers practice squad to begin the season, but was signed to the active roster after Aaron Rodgers suffered a clavicle injury, making him back up to Seneca Wallace. On November 10th, Tolzin would make his debut against the Eagles after an injury to Wallace. Tolzin would start the next 2 games for the 2013 season, but was benched for Matt Flynn by the 3rd game. After spending the 2014 season inactive but on the active roster, Tolzin would only play in 3 games for the 2015 season, having 1 pass caught for 4 yards and some kneels. The Packers would let Tolzin's contract expire until the offseason. After his tenure with Green Bay, Tolzin would sign a 2-year contract with the Colts, being backup to Andrew Luck. Tolzin would start once in 2016 for the Colts' Thanksgiving game against the Steelers. He'd lose 28-7. In 2017, Tolzin would start for the Colts season after Luck was declared out for the season due to a shoulder injury. In the first game of the season, Tolzin would be benched for Jacoby Brissett after throwing 2 pick-sixes to the Los Angeles Rams. Tolzin would be the backup for the rest of that season. After Tolzin's tenure with the Colts, he would be selected by the Iron in the 3rd round of the quarterback draft, but would retire shortly after. On June 19th, Tolzin would be hired as an analyst to work on scouting opponents for his Wisconsin football team. In 2020, Tolzin would be hired to be assistant coach to Mike McCarthy of the Dallas Cowboys, where he currently resides.
Take this move on home.